The morning fog hung low over the English countryside as a nondescript Victorian mansion came to life in the pre-dawn hours of September 1939. Bletchley Park, a rambling estate 50 miles north of London, would soon become the beating heart of the most critical secret operation of World War II. Within these walls and the hastily constructed wooden huts that surrounded them, a peculiar assembly of mathematicians, linguists, chess champions, and crossword enthusiasts would wage a silent war against the seemingly unbreakable codes of Nazi Germany. The story truly began not in England, but in Poland, where brilliant mathematicians had been quietly wrestling with German military secrets since the early 1930s. In December 1932, a young Polish mathematician named Marian Rejewski achieved what many thought impossible. He reverse-engineered the German Enigma cipher machine without ever having seen the device itself. Working in the dim offices of the Polish Cipher Bureau in Warsaw, Rejewski relied on mathematical group theory and a handful of documents obtained by French intelligence to reconstruct the internal wiring of the mysterious machine that Germany believed would secure their military communications forever. The Enigma machine appeared deceptively simple, a typewriter-sized device with a keyboard, lamp board, and several rotating wheels called rotors. But beneath its mundane exterior lay a masterpiece of encryption complexity. When an operator pressed a key, electrical current flowed through a plug board that could swap letters in pairs, then through 3 or more rotating wheels, each wired to scramble the alphabet in unique ways, before bouncing off a reflector and returning through the rotors and plug board again. The result glowed on a lamp board, showing the encrypted letter. With each keystroke, the rotors advanced, changing the electrical pathway and creating a different substitution alphabet. The mathematical possibilities were staggering, over 150 million possible configurations. For nearly 7 years before the war erupted, Rejewski and his colleagues Jerzy Różycki and Henryk Zygalski developed ingenious methods to break Enigma's codes, creating mechanical devices they called bommy to automate the decryption process. But as war loomed and Germany added more rotors and complications to their Enigma machines, the Polish mathematicians realized their small nation would soon be overrun. In a decision that would alter the course of history, they made the agonizing choice to share everything they knew. On a sweltering July day in 1939, in a secret meeting in the Kabaty Woods outside Warsaw, Polish cryptologists revealed their Enigma breakthroughs to astonished British and French intelligence officers who had made virtually no progress against the German codes. They handed over their bommy machines, their methods, even replica Enigma machines they had constructed. The French intelligence officer present reportedly needed to sit down, so overwhelming was the revelation. 5 weeks later, Germany invaded Poland, and the cryptological torch passed to Britain. At Bletchley Park, an eccentric mathematician named Alan Turing inherited the Polish legacy and transformed it into something far more powerful. Turing was an unlikely warrior, awkward in social situations, prone to cycling to work wearing a gas mask during hay fever season, and known for chaining his tea mug to the radiator to prevent theft. But his mind operated on a level that few could comprehend. Working in the Spartan confines of Hut 8, a wooden building that leaked in winter and sweltered in summer, Turing set about creating an electromechanical machine that could search through the billions of possible Enigma settings to find the correct one. The device Turing designed with his colleague Gordon Welchman became known as the Bombay, in honor of the Polish invention that inspired it. Standing over 6 feet tall and resembling a massive bronze-colored cabinet filled with rotating drums, the Bombay was a mechanical monster that clicked and whirred through the night as it tested logical contradictions in potential Enigma settings. Each Bombay contained the equivalent of 36 Enigma machines working in parallel, their drums rotating in synchronization as they searched for the telltale electrical signatures that indicated a possible solution. The machine worked by exploiting German operators' mistakes and predictable patterns, weather reports that always began with wetter, messages that ended with Heil Hitler, or the fact that no letter could ever encrypt to itself due to Enigma's reflector design. But machines alone could not win this battle. The codebreakers needed what they called cribs, educated guesses about the content of messages. They needed captured Enigma materials, and they needed luck. In May 1941, that luck arrived in the form of U-110, a German submarine forced to the surface by British depth charges in the North Atlantic. As the U-boat crew abandoned ship, believing their vessel would sink, a boarding party from HMS Bulldog fought their way inside the damaged submarine and found what they were desperately seeking: an intact Enigma machine, code books, and crucially, the settings for the entire month. The submarine's commander, realizing too late what had happened, tried to swim back to his vessel but drowned in the attempt. The British towed U-110, but it sank before reaching port, taking its secret with it. The Germans never knew their Enigma had been captured. This windfall, combined with Turing's Ban-Barismus technique, a statistical method for narrowing down possible Enigma settings, finally cracked open German naval communications. The intelligence flowed into a system the British designated Ultra, a security classification even higher than top secret. By early 1941, Bletchley Park was reading German military messages sometimes within hours of their transmission, providing Allied commanders with an intelligence advantage unprecedented in military history. The Battle of the Atlantic became the first great testing ground for ultra-intelligence. German U-boats prowled the shipping lanes in coordinated wolf packs, guided by radio messages from their command headquarters. These submarines were bleeding Britain dry, sinking merchant vessels faster than they could be replaced, threatening to starve the island nation into submission. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of Germany's submarine fleet, orchestrated his underwater armada like a conductor leading an orchestra, dispatching detailed radio instructions about where to patrol, when to attack, how to regroup. Each message passed through Enigma encryption, and at Bletchley Park, the codebreakers read them all. The submarine tracking room in the Admiralty basement became a nerve center where ultra-intelligence transformed into action. Pins on giant maps showed the positions of U-boat wolf packs, gleaned from decrypted messages. Convoy routes could be plotted to avoid the submarines lurking in wait. When Dönitz ordered his boats to form patrol lines across specific coordinates, Allied ships simply went elsewhere. Between May 1942 and May 1943, out of 174 convoys crossing the Atlantic, 105 sailed without encountering a single U-boat, a feat impossible without ultra-intelligence revealing German deployment plans. Yet using this intelligence required exquisite care. If the Germans realized their codes were compromised, they would change their procedures and the window would slam shut. The British developed elaborate cover stories. When they sank a submarine revealed by Ultra, they first sent reconnaissance aircraft to spot it, ensuring German survivors would report being discovered by patrol planes rather than suspecting code breaking. Ships were sometimes allowed to be sunk even when Ultra warned of U-boat presence, a terrible calculus of sacrifice to maintain the secret. The intelligence analysts became artists of deception, ensuring that every action based on Ultra could plausibly be explained by normal reconnaissance, direction finding, or chance. There were dark periods when the intelligence dried up completely. In February 1942, the German Navy introduced a 4-rotor Enigma for submarine communications, and Bletchley Park went blind. For 10 terrible months, the codebreakers struggled while U-boats ravaged Allied shipping with renewed ferocity. Losses mounted catastrophically as merchant seamen died by the thousands in the frigid Atlantic waters, their ships torn apart by torpedoes. The second happy time, as U-boat crews grimly called it, saw over 3 million tons of Allied shipping sent to the bottom. Then, in December 1942, another stroke of fortune arrived when HMS Petard's crew boarded the sinking U-559 in the Mediterranean, fighting their way below decks to seize code materials before the submarine plunged to the ocean floor, drowning 2 British sailors who refused to abandon their desperate search for documents. The captured materials, combined with refined bomb techniques, restored Ultra's vision into German naval operations. The intelligence revealed not just submarine positions, but the entire architecture of Germany's Atlantic strategy. Decrypted messages exposed the locations of supply vessels, the Milchkühe or milk cow submarines that refueled and rearmed the attack boats far from home ports. Between May and September 1943, 8 of 12 German supply submarines were hunted down and destroyed, their locations pinpointed by Ultra. Without these floating supply depots, attack submarines had to return to base more frequently, dramatically reducing the time they could spend on patrol. The U-boat force, which had nearly won the Battle of the Atlantic in early 1943, suddenly found itself on the defensive. Admiral Dönitz could not understand what had gone wrong. His submarines were being intercepted with uncanny precision. Supply vessels sailing to secret rendezvous were attacked before they arrived. His carefully coordinated wolf-pack tactics were failing as convoys inexplicably changed course just before his submarines reached attack positions. He suspected treachery, investigated whether senior Italian officers were leaking secrets, even wondered about advanced Allied radar. But he never seriously considered that Enigma itself had been compromised. The machine's mathematical complexity seemed to place it beyond the realm of human solution. That confidence, that fatal certainty in technological supremacy, was Germany's critical mistake. In North Africa, ultra-intelligence proved equally decisive, but required even more delicate handling. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, was perhaps Germany's most capable field commander, and his Africa Corps had pushed British forces to the brink of collapse in 1941 and early 1942. But Rommel had an invisible enemy he never suspected. British codebreakers were reading his mail. Luftwaffe messages revealed German troop dispositions, supply situations, and operational plans. More critically, Ultra exposed the desperate vulnerability of Rommel's supply lines across the Mediterranean. The intelligence showed when and where German transport ships would sail from Italy to North African ports, laden with fuel, ammunition, and reinforcements. British aircraft and submarines, guided by these decrypts, turned the Mediterranean into a killing ground for Axis supply convoys. Ships that should have delivered gasoline to Rommel's tanks instead exploded under torpedo attacks or sank under aerial bombing. In March 1941, ultra-intelligence about German plans to attack British convoys led to the overwhelming Allied victory at the Battle of Matapan, which crippled the Italian fleet and gave Britain naval dominance in the Mediterranean. By late 1942, Rommel's forces were literally running out of fuel for their vehicles, while German supply ships burned within sight of African shores. General Bernard Montgomery, commanding the British Eighth Army, exploited this advantage with methodical precision. When Ultra revealed Rommel's last offensive would strike at Alam Halfa in September 1942, Montgomery prepared his defences exactly where the Germans would attack. The Africa Corps smashed itself against prepared positions, their tanks running dry of fuel as they attempted to manoeuvre, exactly as Ultra had predicted. When Montgomery launched his own offensive at El Alamein in October 1942, he possessed detailed knowledge of German defensive positions, unit strengths, and supply shortages. The battle became a grinding, attritional victory, pushing Rommel into permanent retreat. In January 1943, as British forces approached the Libyan capital of Tripoli, Montgomery used ultra-intercepts to adjust his final assault, directing it along the coastal road rather than inland as originally planned. 2 days later, British troops entered Tripoli. Rommel attributed his defeats to treacherous Italian allies leaking secrets. He never imagined the truth. As 1944 dawned, Bletchley Park prepared for its greatest challenge, supporting the Allied invasion of Western Europe. By now, the operation had grown from a few dozen codebreakers in 1939 to over 9,000 personnel working in shifts around the clock. the wooden huts had multiplied into a sprawling complex of buildings. More than 200 bombs clicked away at sites around Britain, each seeking the daily Enigma settings. Women of the Women's Royal Naval Service, called Wrens, operated the machines and performed much of the critical analytical work, though their contributions would remain unrecognized for decades. The organization processed thousands of intercepted messages daily, translating the raw decrypts into sanitized intelligence reports that carefully concealed their true source. For Operation Overlord, the Normandy invasion, Ultra provided crucial strategic and tactical intelligence. Throughout the spring of 1944, decrypted messages revealed Germany's order of battle in France, the locations of panzer divisions, the state of German defensive preparations, and, crucially, whether the Germans had penetrated Allied deception plans. The Allies had orchestrated an elaborate deception operation called Fortitude, designed to convince the Germans that the invasion would strike at the Pas de Calais rather than Normandy. Ultra intercepts confirmed that Hitler and his high command had swallowed the deception completely. Even after D-Day, German forces remained pinned at Calais, awaiting an invasion that would never come, because Ultra revealed they still believed Normandy was a feint. In the actual invasion zone, Ultra intelligence proved invaluable for targeting. Decrypted messages in May 1944 showed German assessments of Allied air attacks on the French railway system, confirming that the interdiction campaign was succeeding in crippling German logistics. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt's situation reports, intercepted and decrypted, gave Allied commanders a clear picture of German difficulties in moving reinforcements. When German forces did attempt to reposition, Ultra often revealed their movements, allowing Allied aircraft to strike with devastating precision. On June 9, 1944, just 3 days after D-Day, Ultra delivered a prize too valuable to ignore despite the risks. Intercepted messages revealed the exact location of Panzer Group West Headquarters, the command center coordinating German armored forces in Normandy. General Leo Geyer von Schweppenberg's headquarters staff had carelessly left their vehicles and communications equipment in the open at a chateau near Caen. Allied tactical aircraft struck the following day, catching the Germans completely by surprise. The raid killed 17 officers, including the Chief of Staff, destroyed most of the headquarters' communications equipment, and effectively eliminated the only German command capable of coordinating large-scale armoured operations in France. For critical days following the attack, German panzer divisions operated without central direction, significantly easing the Allied consolidation of the beachhead. Throughout the Normandy campaign and the subsequent breakout across France, Ultra intercepts provided Allied commanders with an intelligence advantage that shaped tactical and operational decisions. German fighter squadron movements, airfield locations, defensive preparations, troop transfers, all flowed through Enigma transmissions and onto the desks of Allied commanders. The Germans were fighting blind while their opponents could see their every move. Yet even as ultra-intelligence shaped the course of the war, the secret itself hung by threads more fragile than anyone at Bletchley Park liked to contemplate. John Cairncross, a member of the British Foreign Office assigned to Bletchley Park, was smuggling decrypts to Soviet intelligence in 1943, though this betrayal would not be discovered until decades later. The Americans, eager to exploit ultra-intelligence in the Pacific and Atlantic, sometimes used it with what the British considered reckless abandon, attacking targets with such precision that it risked alerting the Germans that their codes were broken. Every ultra-guided operation required a plausible cover story, and every cover story was a gamble that the Germans would accept the deception rather than question the pattern of Allied successes. The Germans did investigate. After heavy losses in the Atlantic, Dönitz ordered multiple security reviews of Enigma procedures. German mathematicians assessed whether the machine's codes could be broken. Their conclusion was always the same. The mathematical complexity placed Enigma beyond the reach of cryptanalysis, even if an enemy possessed unlimited resources. They were wrong, but their certainty in the machine's invincibility blinded them to the evidence accumulating before their eyes. When Admiral Dönitz testified at the Nuremberg trials after the war, he attributed the sudden jump in U-boat losses in 1942 to Allied radar, which came like an epileptic stroke. He never learned that the British had been reading his orders to his submarines. The scale of Allied deception to protect Ultra bordered on the Baroque. When British forces in North Africa captured German and Italian soldiers, interrogators carefully planted the idea that prisoners had revealed information, providing cover for Ultra-derived intelligence. Reconnaissance aircraft were flown over areas where Ultra had already revealed enemy positions, ensuring German spotters would report being observed from the air. Ships were sometimes warned of submarine threats via elaborate chains of communication designed to make the information appear to come from direction-finding stations or routine patrol sightings rather than code-breaking. The entire Allied intelligence apparatus became a theatre of misdirection, ensuring that every advantage gained from reading Enigma could be attributed to something else. At Bletchley Park itself, security was extraordinary. The thousands of personnel working there signed the Official Secrets Act under penalty of prosecution. The work was compartmentalized so that people in one hut often had no idea what those in the next hut were doing. The codebreakers themselves were forbidden from keeping notes, discussing their work outside secure areas, or even acknowledging to family members where they worked or what they did. They travelled to Bletchley Park on special trains that made unscheduled stops at the estate's private station. They worked in shifts around the clock, sleeping in requisitioned boarding houses in the nearby town, living double lives where their public persona as minor civil servants masked their true role in the most secret operation of the war. The human cost of this work is difficult to quantify, but impossible to ignore. The codebreakers laboured under crushing pressure, knowing that their failures meant deaths at sea, in the desert, on the battlefield. When the four-rotor Enigma locked them out of German naval communications in early 1942, they worked frantically while merchant seamen drowned in the Atlantic, their ships torpedoed by U-boats operating with renewed impunity. When they succeeded in breaking into a new key or cracking a modified procedure, they knew lives would be saved, but they could never speak of their victories or their defeats. The Wrens who operated the bombs sometimes worked until their hands bled from handling the thick electrical cables. Analysts strained their eyes, reading intercepted messages scrawled in German handwriting. Mathematicians like Turing pushed themselves to exhaustion, inventing new techniques to overcome each new complication the Germans introduced to their encoding procedures. Alan Turing exemplified both the brilliance and the burden of this secret war. After his breakthrough work on naval Enigma, he developed Turingery, a technique for attacking the even more complex Lorenz cipher machine that encrypted the highest-level German strategic communications. In December 1942, he travelled to the United States to share British code-breaking knowledge and advise on American efforts, helping to forge the cryptanalytic alliance that would continue long after the war. He later developed a speech scrambling device called Delilah, attempting to secure Allied communications with the same sophistication the Allies were exploiting in German systems. For his contributions, he received an OBE in 1945. Yet Turing could never speak publicly about his wartime achievements. In the post-war years, he would be persecuted by the British government for his homosexuality, driven from his work, and subjected to chemical castration. In 1954, he died from cyanide poisoning in what was ruled a suicide, though questions about the circumstances persist. The nation he had helped save discarded him, and the magnitude of his contribution remained hidden for decades. The Polish mathematicians who made it all possible faced their own tragedies. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, Rejewski, Rojicki and Zygalski fled to France, where they continued breaking Enigma codes for the French intelligence service. After France fell in June 1940, they evacuated to Algeria, then returned to work secretly in Vichy, France. When Germany occupied the Vichy zone in November 1942, Rejewski and Zygalski escaped through Spain, enduring imprisonment there, before reaching Britain via Portugal and Gibraltar. Ruzitsky never made it. He died in 1942 when his ship was torpedoed in the Mediterranean. Rejewski and Zygalski spent the rest of the war in Britain, working on less sophisticated German ciphers, their extraordinary achievement in breaking Enigma unrecognized by their hosts, who considered them security risks. After the war, Rejewski returned to Soviet-dominated Poland, where he worked as an accountant, remaining silent about his cryptological triumph for decades to avoid attention from the communist government. Only in 1967 did he finally document his wartime work, and only in the years before his death in 1980 did the world begin to learn the truth about who had really first broken the Enigma. The full impact of Ultra on the war's outcome remains debated by historians. Some argue it shortened the war by 2 years or more. Others caution against overstating its importance, noting that intelligence alone cannot win battles. It must be combined with military capability, effective leadership, and the courage of men in combat. What is beyond dispute is that Ultra gave the Allies a sustained intelligence advantage unprecedented in military history, allowing them to peer into the German High Command's intentions and capabilities with extraordinary clarity. In the Battle of the Atlantic, Ultra intelligence helped turn the tide at the critical moment when Britain faced potential starvation and U-boats seemed poised to sever the transatlantic lifeline. In North Africa, it exposed the fatal vulnerability of Axis supply lines and revealed the dispositions of German forces. During the Normandy invasion, it confirmed that Allied deception had succeeded and provided tactical intelligence that shaped the campaign. Throughout the war, it saved countless Allied lives by allowing commanders to avoid German strength and strike at German weakness. Beyond its immediate military impact, Ultra helped usher in the age of electronic computing and modern intelligence gathering. The Colossus computer, developed at Bletchley Park to attack the Lorenz cipher, was the world's first programmable electronic digital computer. The collaboration between mathematicians, engineers, and linguists at Bletchley Park established patterns of interdisciplinary cooperation that would characterize modern intelligence work. The techniques developed for exploiting Enigma, from Rejewski's mathematical approach to Turing's logical analysis to the systematic industrial-scale code-breaking operation, laid foundations for the signals intelligence organizations that emerged during the Cold War. The secrecy surrounding Ultra lasted long after Germany's surrender. When the war ended in May 1945, Churchill ordered that all evidence of the code-breaking operation be suppressed. The bombs were dismantled and their components destroyed. Enigma machines captured during the war were given or sold to governments worldwide, with the British and Americans secretly reading the supposedly secure communications of their post-war allies and rivals. The thousands of people who had worked at Bletchley Park returned to civilian life, forbidden from ever discussing what they had done, watching in silence as histories of the war were written that omitted their contributions entirely. Only in 1974, when a former British intelligence officer named F.W. Winterbotham published The Ultra Secret, did the story begin to emerge. Winterbotham's book, authorized by the British government as part of a gradual declassification process, revealed for the first time that the Allies had read German codes throughout much of the war. The disclosure shocked historians and veterans alike, forcing a fundamental reassessment of how the war had been fought and won. Suddenly, Allied victories that had seemed desperate gambles or brilliant intuition could be understood as informed decisions guided by extraordinary intelligence. The mysterious ability of Allied forces to anticipate German moves, once attributed to luck or German incompetence, was revealed as the product of sustained cryptanalytic genius. The revelations continued for decades as archives opened and former codebreakers, finally released from their oaths of silence, began to share their stories. The Polish contribution, virtually unknown in the West, gradually received recognition as Rejewski's memoirs and other documents came to light. The role of women at Bletchley Park, long overshadowed by focus on figures like Turing, has been increasingly acknowledged. The full extent of what was accomplished, the scale of the operation, the sophistication of the techniques, the magnitude of its impact, has only slowly become clear. What emerges from the declassified history of Ultra is a portrait of a secret war fought not with guns and bombs, but with mathematics and logic, patience and precision. It was a war of intellect where mistakes meant death, where success had to remain invisible, where the warriors were mathematicians and linguists rather than soldiers, but where the stakes were just as high and the courage required no less real than any battlefield. The young Polish mathematicians who first cracked Enigma, the eccentric British codebreakers at Bletchley Park, the Wrens who operated the bombs, the intelligence analysts who transformed raw decrypts into actionable information, the commanders who used that intelligence while concealing its source, all were participants in an operation that fundamentally altered the course of World War II. In the decades since the war, the site at Bletchley Park has been preserved as a museum, its huts restored, its machines rebuilt, its story finally told to the public that for so long knew nothing of what transpired there. Visitors walk through the rooms where Turing and his colleagues worked, see reconstructed bombes clicking through their settings, read the testimonies of the men and women who spent the war years keeping the most important secret of the age. The Victorian mansion that seemed so unremarkable in 1939 has become a shrine to what historian Asa Briggs called genius, the exceptional talent required to break codes that their creators believed unbreakable. The legacy of Ultra extends far beyond World War II. The organizational structures, techniques and technologies developed at Bletchley Park influenced the creation of post-war signals intelligence agencies like Britain's GCHQ and America's NSA. The collaboration between British and American codebreakers, forged in wartime necessity, evolved into the intelligence-sharing arrangements that persist today. The recognition that breaking enemy codes could provide decisive strategic advantage shaped military planning and intelligence priorities throughout the Cold War and into the present day. The fundamental lesson of Ultra, that in the modern age information is power, and the ability to protect one's own communications while reading the enemy's can be as important as armies and navies, remains as relevant in the era of cyber warfare as it was when German operators typed messages on their Enigma machines. Yet perhaps the most profound legacy is simply the story itself, a reminder that wars are won not just by force of arms, but by intelligence and ingenuity, not just by the heroes whose deeds can be celebrated, but by the unsung thousands who labor in secret, not just through dramatic moments, but through years of patient, meticulous work. The breaking of Enigma was not a single brilliant insight, but a sustained collaborative effort spanning more than a decade, from Rejewski's first reconstruction in 1932 to the final decrypts as Germany collapsed in 1945. It required Polish courage in sharing what they knew, British determination in building on that foundation, American resources in expanding the operation, and the dedication of thousands who kept the secret even after the war ended. When Admiral Dönitz stood trial at Nuremberg, when Rommel wrote his memoirs, when German generals after the war analyzed their defeats, they sought explanations for how the Allies seemed always to be one step ahead. They pointed to superior resources, to Allied air power, to radar technology, to treachery, to bad luck. The truth, that their most sophisticated cipher system had been compromised from almost the beginning of the war, that their most secret communications had been an open book to their enemies, that the machine they trusted with their lives had betrayed them, remained hidden from them until the revelations of the 1970s. By then, most of them were dead, never knowing how thoroughly their secret war had been lost before it truly began. The story of Operation Ultra stands as one of the most remarkable achievements in the history of warfare, a campaign fought in the shadows that helped determine the outcome of the most destructive conflict in human history. It was intelligence work at its finest and most consequential, cryptanalysis at the highest level, deception and counterintelligence executed with extraordinary discipline. It was also deeply human, the product of individual brilliance and collective effort, marked by triumph and tragedy, its heroes unrecognized for decades, its impact invisible even as it shaped the course of nations. The secret that broke the Nazi codes was itself so well kept that a generation passed before the world learned the full story. And in that story lies a truth that transcends the specific history of World War II, that in war, as in all human endeavors, knowledge is power, secrets can decide the fate of nations, and sometimes the greatest victories are those that must remain unspoken longest.